So I actually have been shooting for more than 20 years, but 20 years full time, and then I've been a freelancer since then. I work for the Associated Press, the Kansas City Star. Kansas City Star is about the size of the San Antonio News Express, or maybe a little bigger, but it's in that size class. And of course, I mentioned yesterday about my home and car getting destroyed in the tornado. I don't know if anybody remembered hearing that, but I mentioned it. This is the book on the Joplin Tornado. I've got about 40 images in here. I was the chief photographer at the Joplin Globe when the tornado happened. And I remained there for quite a few years until I left the business to become a teacher, to get my master's and pursue that. So I've won quite a few accolades in my career, as she already mentioned. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the different types of photography and the different things you need to be a great photographer. So obviously we need some, these are things we need to look for, and things we need to have as a person. So when we're looking for great photos, we look for emotions and nonverbal communication. I'll show examples of these later in the slideshow. We need images that have impact, impactful images, not just people standing around talking, but stuff that actually matters, that really means something. We also need truthfulness. We need it, especially when it comes to photojournalism, or even if you're not a photojournalist and you're an art photographer and you're shooting documentary work, right? Documentary work needs truthfulness. Action and reaction. When we shoot sports, we're not just looking for the cool action shots, we're looking for how do people react. That's what a lot of the images from a tornado or from news coverage is. It's how are people reacting to the events that happen in the news. And a lot of the time with that, the reactions also have emotions and nonverbal communication, the things in item number 1 there. And then we need artistic integrity and style. We have to do this with a sort of panache, right? We need to do it in such a way that it's artistic, that it's creative, that we look at our composition. If we don't incorporate all of that, then the work is lackluster, right? And then the last thing we need is clean composition, which kind of goes hand in hand with the artistic integrity. We want our composition to be clean so that people can easily identify what's important in the image and why this news is important. All right, next. So what do you all think is the most important tool for a photographer? I know you see me bring up all this impressive, expensive gear, but what do you think is the most important tool for a photographer?
Angle.
What?
Angle. Camera.
Okay. Story? Yeah. Okay, you're getting closer.
Inspiration.
What now?
Inspiration.
Okay.
Message.
That's really good. Yeah.
Message.
Okay. Message is important too. None of your answers are bad, but we're looking for which one is the most important. He's the closest with the eyes. He's the closest there. So anyway, I put this photo here because he was using a tool, and I thought that was funny. But this was former Hall of Famer baseball player Cal Ripken Jr., which is funny because I used to collect baseball cards of him when I was a kid. And then here he was after the Joplin Tornado helping rebuild someone's house as part of this crew. So I'm actually laying on my back with this wide lens on a camera, actually that camera, the one that's attached to that big giant lens. These are all interchangeable. You can move these lenses around to whatever camera you need them on. And so I'm laying on my back in the gravel that's going to be someone's basement once his home is rebuilt while he's putting it. This is one of the support beams that goes into the basement. And I'm laying on my back shooting into the sun to get the starburst coming, breaking over the edge of it. So, but I had to get enough fill light. Thankfully, the light was reflecting off of the white gravel that they had placed down, giving me just enough fill light on his face. So as a photographer, you're looking for all those elements. So it can sometimes be complicated. And then I'm shooting multiple frames on the motor drive to get the moment just right, where the hammer isn't covering his face and where it's not already hitting the nail. Because after the nail, the energy's gone from the photo. It's like, you remember studying in class, kinetic energy, potential energy, right? So while the hammer's in motion, it still has energy. Once it's already hit, the energy's over, right? So you want a photo with a little bit of motion, with a little bit of energy sometimes. And so I wanted to get that just right. So you shoot a lot of frames sometimes to get just that one moment. We call that the decisive moment in photography. The moment is better than the moments before and better than the moments after. Right? Next slide. I'm not going to read these captions. I was just kind of telling you a little bit about it. So the brain is actually the most important thing in photography. And of course, the second is the eye. That's why I said he's the closest, because the eye is really crucial. But if you don't have a brain, the eye is really an essential, it's really an extension of the brain, right? Because the eye connects to the occipital lobe of the brain, and that's where we process that visual information. So the brain is the most important tool of photographers. It's the source of creativity, which you were talking about inspiration. So actually, you were super close there too, because we're talking about creativity. And then the third thing is the heart, actually. We need to be able to be empathic. We need to be able to relate to the people that we're photographing, to be able to understand what it is they're experiencing and that they're going through. Excuse me. Because if we can't relate to the people, then it makes it more difficult to get the best possible photo. We have to kind of, inside our head, kind of put ourselves in their shoes for a moment and go, what are they dealing with? How are they handling this? And how can I best photograph that? And then the fourth most important thing, even more important than the camera, are the lenses themselves. There's a reason that lens costs twice as much as that camera, when they were new. Because that glass is super, super important for the sharpness and the quality of the image. So the glass is much more important. I would rather have an amateur camera and pro glass than have a pro body with some amateur glass on it. You can't make up for low quality glass. But I mean, when you're getting started, use what you have, right? Shoot what you can with what you have when you get started. So lastly is the camera, really. It's the last tool on the list. You might think it should be the first, but it's not. All right, let's move on. All right, so, and I'll tell you this, I won in college for a student award. I won first place in the nation for the photo of the year from the Associated Collegiate Press on the national level. I went down to New Orleans for the reception for that. But what was interesting was I shot that national award-winning photo. I beat out every college photographer in the entire nation, and I did it with a $7 lens I bought at a not a garage sale, but like an auction that my grandfather had gone with me to, and he's like, "Oh, here we go." And it wasn't even a name brand lens. I shot it on an old film camera, and it was a Minolta, which doesn't even exist anymore. And it was a manual focus, totally manual focus, manual exposure, everything. It was an old Minolta X370. I don't know if anybody's familiar with those, which was my first camera. And I shot that with a $7 Bushnell lens, which they make good binoculars, but they're not really known for manufacturing lenses. And that particular photo, ended up taking first in the nation. So don't think you have to have expensive camera equipment to take great photos. Like I said, the camera is the least important thing, as long as you work your way up to that. So the first thing we mentioned was emotions and nonverbal communication. So obviously we have a lot of emotion in this photo. This is an engineering battalion officer from, which one is it from? The 203rd Engineering Battalion. And they were getting ready to be deployed to Afghanistan. This was back in 2009. And so I shot this photo among a ton of others, people kissing babies on the forehead and all the kind of stuff you expect to see. But I really like this one because he was just holding them so tight. And I like that he had a boy and a girl, so he had both, loving his kids equally. I was like, that looks like just a good dad to me. It just looks like a great dad. And the look of sorrow on his face, and actually the shadow. Normally, I'm not a big fan of the shadows on the faces, but it really works here because it kind of helps show his sorrow that he's having to go away. He's going to miss part of these kids growing up. He might miss one of their birthdays. Who knows what he's going to have to deal with while he's gone off of war, right? And so it just kind of brings home the impact of what these things do to the military men and families and stuff. And so I submitted this photo. It won the Photo of the Month for the Associated Press for photos that are submitted by staff members from newspapers. They're part of that EP system. And then it ended up winning the first place in the state for the year, too. So that was the one we saw there getting us that Photo of the Year, 2009. All right, next one. So more emotions, nonverbal communication. Sometimes those emotions are happy. We get to see people jubilant. I think I called this one the Artful Dogs, like the Artful Dog here. And so this was a high school in Neosho, Missouri, where they have this hill that leads down to the high school, and every year the seniors get to go out and paint the hill, and it's a tradition there that's been going on for probably 30, 40 years at least, if not longer. And so every year I would kind of go down, and this was the favorite one I ever got, where the one guy, the smile on his face as he's reaching, trying to slap that, you can see right where he just slapped fresh paint right on his face, you know? And I think this ended up winning some award. I can't remember if it was first or second place in features. And so anyway, it won a state contest in Missouri. So, because most of my career I was in Missouri, I also worked in Kansas for a little bit and Arkansas for a little bit. But of my 20 years, I think about 18 of it were in Missouri. So, this was at the Joplin Globe. All right, next one. Oh. So more, those are actually images that are out of this book. They're from the aftermath of the Joplin Tornado. The people on the left are at church and they're crying because they just lost their homes. And luckily, I don't think any of these people lost family that I know of. But still, though, when you lose everything you've ever had, it's also your memories, you know, all of your photographs of your loved ones from years past. Some of that stuff is irreplaceable, you know. It's not just, oh, I lost a car or a home. It's, you know, like for me personally, I lost letters from my grandmother who's passed on for over 15 years. And, you know, I'll never get those back. You just don't. And when you read someone's handwriting, you can almost hear their voice in your head as you read those letters written in their own hand. It's different if it's written in type, but when it's written in by hand, you can almost hear their voice in your head again. So you kind of lose out on those memories, which is unfortunate. But anyway, this guy here was like an insurance salesman, and he was like one of the happiest people I knew in town. And I photographed him before for the paper for, I forget, some promotion or something. I can't remember now what it was. But just the look on his boy's face, holding that teddy bear between the two of them with his arms wrapped around his dad, like hold me, Dad, I don't know what's going to happen. They don't have a home anymore, you know? And that guy normally is like super cheerful. And seeing him kind of down like that was like, wow, you know? Because he's one of those people you think nothing would ever faze him, you know? Next one, please. And then, of course, because of that, President Barack Obama came to town. I've actually photographed, 4 U.S. presidents? I photographed both George Bush's and Gerald Ford, but not while he was in office. It was later on when he did a visit in Branson, Missouri. And then I photographed Barack Obama. I was part of the presidential crew. I got to go around with the White House photographers and everybody else in the vehicles for the motor pool, which was really exciting to do something like that. And so what you can see on the left in the background is what remained of Joplin High School. It was actually the largest high school in the state of Missouri, because Joplin really is a city that should have had like 2 or 3 high schools, but instead they had one massive giant high school. They used to have 2 years ago, they merged them, but then Joplin kept growing, and instead of building a second high school, they just kept adding on to the high school. So it was this huge, massive thing, and they still just have one high school. They rebuilt the whole thing after the tornado and just built another giant, massive high school. So even though Joplin is a city with less population than Laredo, they have to play against the Kansas City and St. Louis schools because they've got so many students in that one high school that they have to face off against the biggest schools in the state. It's kind of crazy that they do that, but it makes it to where they're not super competitive in football. They are great in baseball. And so anyway, this was cool. This was the governor at the time, Jay Nixon, in the middle there. And so I got to photograph the kind of touring the tornado damage. I had lots of photos. There's a bunch in here of Barack Obama looking over different places in the Joplin tornado. So we're looking for impactful images. This is also aftermath of the tornado. Images that make you say, whoa, you know, stuff that makes you just, wow, how did that happen? And a tornado just, you know, it just picks up things and throws them everywhere. You know, those aren't the only kind of photos I took with, you know, low quality. I photographed plane crashes. I had an F-16 down in a cornfield when I worked for the Warrensburg paper outside of Whiteman Air Force Base. Just all kinds of stuff in my career. You get moments that just make you go, whoa, there's just the impact of the photo alone. But for this, I used a telephoto lens, but I used a wide depth of field. I put it all the way down to f/22 so I could get the car in the foreground relatively in focus. And I focused on the truck in the middle and then got another one in the background. But by using a wide depth of field, instead of having be shallow, I can see a lot of what's going on in the image. So I get 3 layers of depth, which is another cool photo technique. Right. And so images with impact, I shot a lot of concerts for the Kansas City Star. I don't know if you guys have heard of Tech Nine. He's a huge rapper. He's actually from Kansas City. So they love him up there because it's his hometown. And I photographed him at the Midland, I think it was the Midland. Yeah, Midland Theater in downtown Kansas City. And I mean, this guy's a real performer. I'm not a huge rap fan on a personal level, but he was outstanding to watch. I mean, the face paint, just very dramatic, awesome lighting, and real entertainer. Just made for a lot of great photos. I've got like shots of him sticking his tongue out in the middle of things. It's just really cool stuff. But I look for impactful lighting is what I'm going for in this particular shot, to see that emotion and the lighting and everything kind of comes together to make that shot really pop. Okay, next one. And sometimes impactful images. Yeah. So what happened on this one, of course, he got hit in the jugular. He was going for a bunt, and the ball glanced off, hitting the jugular. But what's kind of funny about this particular shot, not for the poor individual involved, but I got back to the newsroom. I worked up the picture. I took it up to the sports editor, and I said, and I always give them a few choices to choose from. And I gave him this one, and the sports editor refused to run it. And I was like, man, that's the best photo. You really need to run that. And he's like, no, it makes it look bad. I don't want to run it. I'm like, come on, run it. And old Fryer, he's retired now, but he was like, no, I don't want to run it. It makes it look bad. He wouldn't run it. And so the state contest came around, and I entered it in the contest, even though it never ran in the paper. At that time, there wasn't a rule that it had to have been published. It just had to have been shot on a news assignment by a news photographer. So I submitted it, and I won 3rd place in the state for a photo that never even ran in the paper. So of course, then I had to tell him about it. I was like, hey, you should have read it. It's a low-rate photo. You didn't run it. So yeah, so sometimes you have to do that kind of stuff. Make sure that they understand. It's part of the communication in the newsroom, is make sure that they understand you're the photo professional. They're the sports person. Yeah, they know the sports side of it, but you know the visual side of it. You're the visual communicator. All right, next one. And then truthfulness. We have to be true to our readers. We have to be true to the people that we photograph. Sometimes it's not just covering the event, but covering the other things related to that event. On the right, we have a firefighter who just got out of a fire. It's cold out. They're all hot and steamy, and we see the steam coming off. I got them against the darker background so you can really see the steam coming off their head, just to see not just the fire, but what the firefighters have to go through in order to battle this thing. And of course, even then, I take names. I don't just say a firefighter. Captain John Corey pulls off the hood. I didn't know who that guy was before I shot that photo, but by the time I got done, before I got back to the office, I knew who that firefighter was. And then over on the left, these are recovery mathematics. We did a investigative piece, not really so much investigative, but more of a kind of featurey, newsy feature on, we called it Trial by Ice was the name of the publication. This is my lead photo for it. And it was basically, we were covering the problems with meth addiction in Joplin, Missouri, and how many people were trying to recover from that and everything. Because it's a very serious problem. And Joplin was one of the worst places for it in the nation, where people were addicted and hooked on meth. We had lots of coverage in the newspaper on people getting arrested for manufacturing it. And it's a very problem drug because it really destroys people's lives, it destroys their body. It's a horrible, horrible thing. But anyway, this was about people who were trying to get over that, to move on, to restore their lives. And so this was at a Shoal Creek Revival Church in Granby, Missouri, and they had a meth recovery session for people, and they would go there and attend it. It's great to cover things like that have impact on the community, right? That hopefully help people get their lives better. You'll notice I shoot a lot of shots of people hugging because it shows emotion. It's very powerful. And I know here locally you see people hug all the time, but honestly, I'll give you a little secret about my community. People rarely hug. I'm serious, man. I come down here and people are hugging me, and I'm like, oh. And then I realize, oh, this is the Latino way. Okay, that's cool. And then I just go ahead and go along with it because I'm like, okay, that's cool. But back home, it's like my uncle and I, stand apart, shake hands, like someone might think they like each other. Yeah, it's weird. It really is. It's very different in the two communities, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just weird, you know, that it's so different. I'm not saying hugging people is weird. I mean, it's cool. It's nice. Not during COVID though, you know. But non-COVID, yeah, it's great, you know. Okay, next one. Action and reaction. So obviously we're looking for those big action shots. That's what these things are for. Actually, you shoot that with a really big one. I'll talk about those in a moment. I actually shot that with my 70-200, which is a mid-range zoom. And I know when I pull it out, you're gonna be like, wait, that's mid-range? For most people, this is their biggest lens, but all right, so this is my medium lens, which is a 70-200. If you think, this one, what were these, about $2,400 or something like that I spent on this one? Yeah, and that thing is like 4 times as expensive. It's ridiculous. Look, I had to pay that because I bought it from a friend who bought a big one. It'll fall. I can't replace you right now. But yeah, so these attach on. I actually have the tripod mount removed from this right now. They're a little bit lighter because they're very heavy lenses. Yeah, so there, so it doesn't roll and fall on the floor. There we go. Got the protection here. So anyway, but I shot that with a lens like that, or actually, I'm pretty sure it was that one, 70-200 2.8. And this was at a Pittsburgh State University football game. They're a big powerhouse in Division II for national level football. They've been the national champs or gone to the national championship several times. So they're really good. They just had, about 5 years ago, they had one of the players went to the NFL. I don't know if they've had any lately. But yeah, so he's like almost got a finger right on it. He's in the end zone. If he got that, that would have been a touchdown. So we want to shoot photos that have impact too in sports, right? But it's about, this is what we call peak action in photography. It's that moment, and it's kind of like the decisive moment idea that it's better than every moment before it and every moment after it. The moment before that, he's not even close to the ball. The moment after that, the ball's bouncing on the ground or whatever, right? There's just that one moment that's peak in the action. It's so much better than every other moment around it. And that's the one you're looking for. And it's not really luck, it's timing. You've got to be ready. You've got to watch for the pass, figure out about when it's going to be there, and then start pressing the shutter release, right? And you think it's about to come into your frame. You have to kind of anticipate this stuff. If you rely on the motor drive, you're probably going to miss it most of the time, actually. Even with 8 frames a second, what was this one, 10 frames a second? Yeah, they still miss shots. Next one. What we got here? Oh, okay, the reactions, right. So this was the last game of the regular season, the last at bat. They're down by 1 or 2 runs. They got the person at bat. He's even down to his last strike. He's got 2 strikes up. And the guy swings, he hits a home run over the fence. There's 2 runners on. And they end up winning the final game of the season, sending them into the postseason. So it was a huge moment for them. So instead of photographing the batting, which is kind of a boring photo, it can be a good photo once in a while, but that's not the photo here. The photo is this, the reaction. You remember from science, every action has an equal but opposite reaction? Who knew? Science applies to art too, right? Photography, we look a lot at science. We look at light and physics and the color of light and the light spectrum. But anyway, we also look at this idea of every action has an equal but opposite reaction. The bigger the action, the bigger the reaction, right? When they win a game, they get excited. When they win a state championship, the whole team goes crazy, right? The bigger the action, the bigger the reaction. And so it applies here. So this is a big moment. It was almost as big as the state championship because it sent them into the finals so that they could actually compete in the playoffs to try to get to the state championship. So without that, though, their season was over, right? So that's a huge moment for them. All right, next one. Or sometimes it's the calm before the storm. I don't know if you guys know who Jamie McMurray is. He's actually from Joplin, Missouri. He, at that time, was driving a Havoline 42. I don't know what he drives now. 42 years of life in the universe and everything, if you're a Dungeons Dragons fan. Have you ever seen Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Anyway, all right. So anyway, so 42. I love that. It's just fun. But I love this because you've got all these thousands to start. And they're just waiting, right? And instead of like, you know, make sure the car's ready and working on stuff, he's taking a moment to talk to his little niece to see what's up with her and how she's doing. And she's probably just got stuff in her hand, kind of telling him about something that has nothing to do with NASCAR, not that important, you know, but to her it's important, right? And so that's important to him then as her uncle. So I thought that was pretty cool, just that calm before the storm, and she was from Joplin, and we were, you know, Joplin, she knows her foot, she even got one of her feet, like she's kind of nervous, she's got her foot kind of, yeah, it's pretty interesting the things you see in a photograph, that body language and stuff. But I just like this calm before the storm, it's kind of neat. And again, I said when they win the state championship, it's huge. Webb City High School is probably one of the most winning high school teams in the state of Missouri during the, 15 or 16 years I was in the Joplin Globe. I guess it was 15. I started in the middle of 2000, I left in early 2014. So yeah, 13, almost 14 years. But anyway, so they, of those years that I was there, they went to the state championship 7 times. And they won every time except once when they only lost by 1 point. So they're a very, very good team. And this was one of the early times they won. I can't remember exactly what year. It looks like it says 2002, but I looked it up and they didn't win in 2002. So I think it's 2006. It's a really weird looking 6 on that trophy. And I don't know why. Maybe somebody printed it wrong and they replaced it with a different number or something on the trophies. I don't know. But anyway, but I got them hoist the trophy, the thrill of victory. And what's interesting is that I had this on Flickr. Anybody familiar with Flickr? We use it at TMU. I have classes for all of the Photo 1, Photo 2. We also run a travel photography class where we have a trip to Peru. We went in January 2020 and did travel photography, kind of National Geographic type stuff. We were going to try to go again this year, but students are very hesitant to go. So last time we had like 20 students. This time only like 5 signed up, so we didn't have enough students to go. But hopefully we'll go again maybe the next year, the following year. So, but yeah, it's a lot of fun. We had so much fun in Peru. We went to Machu Picchu to see one of the 7 wonders of the world. You feel like Indiana Jones out there exploring. Yes.
Do you do summer classes?
Oh yeah, I teach summer classes too. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, usually in the month of June. I take July and the first couple weeks of August off to go back home and visit family in Missouri because I don't get to see them much during the year. So I go and spend usually a good quality month or so with my brother, my sister, and my parents and stuff like that. But yeah, so I had this on Flickr. And the Smithsonian Institute saw it, and they contacted me, and it ran in a traveling exhibit for the Smithsonian Institute for traveling teams. So it was pretty cool. I was real excited about that. I was like, man, I've never had anything in the Smithsonian. That's cool, you know. I don't know if someday it'll end up in a permanent exhibit, but it was in a traveling exhibit back then. But that was probably 12 years ago. I don't really know if it's still running or not. All right, next one. And then, of course, the agony of defeat. Not every reaction photo is a happy one. Sometimes they're sad because they lost. And this was the goalkeeper. I love the Spider-Man outfit. That was very cool. But so this goalkeeper here, she was really disappointing, but they lost against Kickapoo, which was really a bigger school because it was from Springfield, bigger city. But they lost in the big District 12 tournament final game. So if they had won that, I think they would have went on to the state championship. So this was one where they didn't get to that next level. And so seeing people's disappointment, their sadness, that one photo tells the story of the whole game, right? You know, exactly when you see that they lost. All right, next one. Artistic integrity and style. So over time, photographers develop a style. My style is I don't use the normal lens, the 50. I either shoot big telephotos and compressed space, or I use this lens here is a 14 to 24 super wide. I don't use anything between 24 and 70. That's kind of a beginner lens. It's a great place to start. I used to own lenses like that, but after I went pro, I just found that I never was that distance from people to use that, right? I usually either get very close with a wide angle and use depth perception to make my images more interesting, or I'm back farther and I use the super telephoto. That's a 400-2.8 is what that's called. And that gets you so tight, but it also gives you a super shallow depth of field that compresses the space. And so this one I shot with a 14mm down low on the ground looking up. And the reason you want to change your angle like that, somebody mentioned angle earlier, right? One of the reasons you want to do that is so you can get those clean backgrounds. We were talking about clean composition. By getting that overcast sky in the background instead of trees and the tops of buildings, I don't have anything distracting in that photo. Our eyes go right to the boy's eyes, and we see the light on his face, and then we see the circular shape, which is an interesting shape. And so the eye looks for shapes as it travels around a photograph looking for things to look at. All right, next one. And then, of course, this I just shot here February 11th, so this is more recent stuff. This was right here at the George Washington Festival Carnival 2 weekends ago, I guess. Was it 2 weekends? 2 or 3 weekends ago, I don't know, pretty recent. At the same auto arena. And this was an 8-second time exposure I set. And actually, this is still set up from that because I haven't shot anything since. I got my tripod mount on the bottom of the camera. And because I had it on the tripod with a super wide angle lens and shot the carnival rides in 8-second exposures just to see what I would get. And you kind of have to do all your framing, set stuff up, test your exposures till you get the right thing, and then look for very interesting images. And this was my favorite one. It came out really well. But I had quite a few that were pretty good. I think the next one is another one from that, I think. Yeah. So this was just a regular old Ferris wheel. That Ferris wheel looked like nothing when you looked at it. I mean, it just looked like a regular Ferris wheel, right? Nothing too special. But these lights were actually very thin. There weren't much of them. But when you collect those lights at an 8-second exposure as it's spinning around, they start getting denser and more saturated and more colorful. And by the end, you've got this thing with beautiful blues and reds and yellows and greens. And it ends up being this just spectrum of cool color. But when you look at it with the human eye, it doesn't look like much of anything until you see it in an 8-second exposure. So you can see the blurry parts around the edges over here. Those are the things hanging off of it as they're moving, but because in 8 seconds they're not staying in the same place long enough, they blur and they move in the photograph. I've taken photos of cars at intersections at night in long-term exposures like this that were 8 seconds to several minutes long, and all you see is the hubcap of the car that reflected light, and then there's no car there, the car's ghosted out, and you just see a hubcap sitting up in the middle of the street. And of course, the lights overhead, all 3 lights are on at the same time because they were all on at one point or another during the exposure. It's pretty neat stuff. And we do a lot of this stuff in the photo classes too, we just kind of explore stuff. So this is from Peru. Like I said, we went to, this is actually from Machu Picchu. We got a little llama here. It just rained, so the llama's got wet fur, so that's why it kind of looks like that. It's a little different than what you might think. It's not quite so fluffy. And of course, the wide angle, my style, I like to get down low. I like to get wherever I'm going to get the most interesting angle. I get a nice clean background, but I got just a hint of Machu Picchu in the background there, just a hint of it. That photo almost looks like it can be taken anywhere, really, anywhere that has llama. But I wanted to kind of look at the llama eating the grass, so I got very close, and luckily he wasn't super shy. I was able to get very close. But they're used to people being around. These are wild llamas, but they live there on Machu Picchu. And you go there, and there's 5 or 6 of them. They actually just walk up and down the stairs like people do. It's pretty crazy. Yeah, it's pretty neat. All right, next one. And then this was a photo in downtown Cusco on the square. I think it's called Plaza de. Oh man, it's in the caption here. Where is it? I don't know. Yes, Plaza de Armas. It's in downtown Cusco, and this is the Inca visionary. He was the Inca king back in the day. Some people believe that Machu Picchu might have been his palace. That's one of the theories. I don't know if that's accurate or not. He lived from 1418 to 1471. He reigned from 1438 all the way up to his death. So he reigned for like 40 plus years. So pretty good reign as a king, I guess. Anyway. And then talking about composition, we're almost done here because we just have 3 composition ones. We're not going to talk about every composition rule. I have an entire presentation just on composition alone. That's all it talks about. If you take any of my courses, you'll find out. And we go through probably about 20 different composition techniques and how they all work. There's a lot more out there than most people realize. But anyway, so clean composition. One of the things you can do is called framing technique. Framing technique is a lot of fun. So at Machu Picchu, I looked for the windows, and then within the window, I found one of the mountains in the background. And so I photographed that. So I framed the mountain with the windows of Machu Picchu there at the Lost City. It's not really lost anymore, but it was lost at one time. So anyway, so I called this a window to the gods because the Inca people believed that these mountains actually were their gods, and they each had a different name. So it's very interesting. So anyway, so I have that one. I shot one very similar to this that has one window, and then within it is another window, right? So it's doing a tier thing, but I couldn't line anything up beyond the other window because I wanted to go 3 levels deep, and I just couldn't find the right one. Maybe if I get to go again, I'll find that one moment where I can get it. All right, next one, that one angle. This was actually also in Machu Picchu. It just rained that day. We went in January that year. We went during the winter. Well, our winter here, the winter semester at KU, which they don't really have a winter or a summer. They're so close to the equator there, and their altitude is so high that the temperatures are mostly the same around the year. But instead, they have what's called a rainy season, which is it's in January, and around that time period is the rainy season. And then they have the dry season, which is in our summer, right? In August and July and June is the dry season. And so anyway, so it just rained that day. We weren't even sure if we were going to get photos. We were very worried, but then luckily it cleared up just enough to get photos after we finally got to the top of the mountain and started walking around up there. But yeah, so I saw this millipede crawling across the walls of Machu Picchu there in the city itself while we were walking through the city. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. And he was big. I mean, he was good size. I mean, he's bigger up there than he is in real life, you know. I say he, I don't know if it's a he or she. I have no idea. I can't figure out the gender of a millipede. But anyway, but I love the water droplets on it, right? They kind of show, you know, the rain, the weather, and they tell more of a story than just it walking on the wall. So I call this an ancient journey because he's traveling across this ancient wall from prehistory. It's pretty cool. All right, next one. And then composition. This one is rule of thirds. Let me explain. Does anybody here ever learn rule of thirds? So rule of thirds basically states that I can take a photograph and I can divide it into a total of 9 sections. 3 sections up top, 3 sections in the middle, then 3 sections down below. If I were to draw a line on this photo, it would come down through the governor's face. This was the governor of Missouri at the time. You probably saw him in that photo with Obama. And so right here is where I would have one rule of third, and then I would have a rule of third right here, and then the upper rule of third would go across right where the gun is. And so where this rule of third intersects with the other rule of third is where you want to place important things in a photo. You don't want to put people's faces and stuff directly in the middle of a photo. So I've kind of got him on the lower third with the right third. And then I got that on the left third with the upper third. So 2 of my intersections have important things in the governor's face and the governor firing the gun to start the trout season. There's a huge tradition in Missouri, especially down in Cassville, where Roaring River State Park is. And every year I went down there multiple times, and it's like a whole day photo fest. Where you go down there before the sun is even up. I'm like leaving at 5 in the morning from Joplin and heading down there and getting down there before, because it was like an hour drive from Joplin. It's down out in rural Missouri, almost to the Arkansas line. And so definitely the Ozarks, right? And so anyway, but yeah, I couldn't believe the timing I got on that when I saw the photo, I was like, whoa, I actually got the burst of the gun. It wasn't just, I thought it was going to get a snap and maybe a little smoke. And then when I got that, I was like, oh, whoa, that's a cool photo. It's really neat. You don't usually see the sparks fly like that out of a starting pistol. So I thought it turned out really wicked. All right, next one, please. And that's it. Okay. So yeah, so I was just kind of trying to show you some basic, simple things. Oh, the composition thing on the not caterpillar, on the millipede, the idea there was just simplicity. Just keep it simple sometimes is really important. All right, any questions? How are we doing on time? Are we over? We're okay? I thought it was gonna take longer to go through. There was, because I only gave myself 2 minutes of slides, so maybe I went through some of them a little faster. So what do you guys think? Anybody here learning photography or studying photography?
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
How do you manage to always have good lighting? Like, because
Using your eye, like you talked about, your eye. You have to look for the lighting. The very first thing I do when I get to a scene to photograph it, I look for my lighting. That's the very first thing I do. Then I set my camera settings for the lighting that I'm working with. And I'm looking around to see where are my shadows, where are my hot spots, where's my light at, and I look for the light. I train myself, I have 2 expensive $500 flashes, and I haven't used them in probably 10 years. I never use flash. I shoot all available light because I look for where the light is good. I rely a lot on high ISO when I need it, but I try not to use it unless I absolutely have to. But yeah, it's basically just using the eye to look for the light and then framing your shots to emphasize that light, because that's what you're looking for. Light is everything. Even George Eastman. Anybody know who George Eastman was? Anybody here? Probably the most influential person in all of history for photography, but he's not known for his photographs. George Eastman. Nobody knows who George Eastman is. He was the founder of Kodak. And George Eastman said, light is everything. Light is everything. Without light, think of it, really photography is, darkness is our palette. Instead of the painter having a palette that's white, our palette is black, it's darkness, it's the absence of light. We're painting with light. And you kind of have to look at it that way. So you're looking for where's my light, because that's my image. So after you train yourself, you know, and you start looking for that light everywhere you go, and where do I have good color light? Like, do I have greens from fluorescence? Do I have oranges from tungsten lights, like you know, the old-fashioned light bulbs? You have to look for those type of things. So you're looking at the quantity of the light and the quality of the light. The color of the light is one of its qualities. But it's also the quality of the light is how harsh is it? Is the light direct or is it non-direct? So if the light's coming through the clouds, it's indirect. It's being diffused, it's being softened. And as that happens, we lose some of the shadows. We get nice, smooth lighting. Some of the sports shots were shot on an overcast day. You might say, hey, I don't get as fast of a shutter speed to stop action. It's like, yeah, but you don't have to fight the shadows either. So everything in photography has an advantage and a disadvantage. But yeah, you're looking for that light. And you'll train yourself to do it. The more you look, every time you go to something, study the light. Look at the way the light falls. I can usually look at a photograph and tell you exactly where the sun was, where this angle of the light's coming in, just by how the shadows fall. And I usually do it in just a second because I'm so used to looking at images to see where's the light coming from, how is it going. And it's important to know those kind of things, even if you don't want to be a photographer, but if you want to be an animator, you have to know how light falls off of a three-dimensional object, you know, or even as an artist, as a painter, you have to study light. How does the light work with objects, and where do the shadows form? Am I getting color contamination because the light source is, you know, sometimes it's interesting. Like if I'm wearing a white shirt and I lean up against a red barn and pose for a photo, my shirt's going to turn out pink because the white light of the sun is going to hit the barn, reflect off that barn, and cast its color of red onto my shirt, and I'm going to end up with like a pink shirt because the white of my shirt is going to be picking up that red reflecting off the barn. If it just picks up daylight, it has all the colors of the spectrum in it, so it comes out white because that's what light is. It's white light. It's the combination of all colors, and the way light works, not the way paints work, but yeah. So yeah, so you start to look for things like that and be careful of those color contaminations to avoid those. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's not an easy answer because there's not any magical formula. It's just years and years of watching the light, looking at the light, and start now looking for light. Once you start getting the light right in your photos and noticing the way the light falls off the cheeks, the way it falls off of people's faces, right, their foreheads and things like that. You got to be very careful if you've got like a bald guy in the photo. You got to be careful with the way the light falls. You're going to get a shine on that forehead. So you may be trying to shoot it from a different angle so you're not getting that reflection. So you're looking for all those things while you shoot. And it takes some practice, but after a while you get good at it the more you do it. You got to remember, I did this for 20 years full time, so 40 hours a week for 20 years. So I got to where I could see everything. I wasn't that way when I got started, but by the time I spent that time in the career, I knew exactly what I was looking for every time I went to a photo shoot. But then you still get thrown a loop every once in a while. But I think that's one of the fun, exciting things about photojournalism is that you shoot in a very wide variety of lighting situations. You're not just sitting in a studio all day. Not that there's anything wrong with that, if that's what you want to do. But for me, it was getting out there, seeing people, getting access to public events and things, and being able to photograph stuff that hardly anyone else was getting to photograph. When I look at the number of people that I photographed in my career, it's kind of mind-blowing. Like I said, I photographed 4 US presidents, but I also photographed Oliver North, Norman Schwarzkopf. These were all huge 4-star generals at the time. Who's the other big one? Oliver North, Norman Schwarzkopf. There's another big, huge 4-star person that I photographed. But and a lot of other political candidates. Like I photographed John McCain. He never became president, but he ran for president. I photographed so many people. It's hard to even remember everybody I photographed. And then lots of rock bands. I photographed Motley Crue, Alice Cooper, Blues Traveler. You may not even recognize some of these names because they're older bands. But yeah. But I photographed newer people. Like I photographed Drake. You guys probably know who Drake is. I photographed him in Kansas City with a Missouri shirt on, so that was kind of funny. He actually knew he was in Missouri. It's kind of a running joke. Kansas City, Missouri, a lot of people think it's in Kansas, which there is a Kansas City, Kansas, but it's very small. The big Kansas City, like where the Chiefs are, and the Royals, they're in Kansas City, Missouri. But a lot of the time you'll get these acts that come from out of town. They'll be up on the stage on the Missouri side, and they'll go, "All right, Kansas," and people just look at them like, "You don't even know what state you're in." You know, it's so funny because they just assume because it's Kansas City, they're in Kansas, and it's like, yeah, there is. You know, like the Speedway shot, that wasn't Kansas City, Kansas, but the Speedway's there, and the professional soccer teams over in Kansas. But the Missouri side is where downtown Kansas City is. It's where Crown Center, the world headquarters for Hallmark. Almost all the big stuff in Kansas City is on the Missouri side, and it has a much larger population. So anyway, fun stuff though. Any other thoughts, questions? I don't know how we're doing on time. 5 minutes? Okay. Yeah, sure.
You took a picture of Barack Obama and Bush.
Yeah, both Bushes. I photographed George Bush Sr. back in 1993, like when I was just getting started. And then I photographed George W. Bush probably like 4 or 5 different times at least during my career. He came to Aurora, Missouri to speak to farmers. I photographed him on a campaign trail when he was coming through there through Missouri. He had a couple different speaking engagements during the years while I worked for the Joplin Globe. So I photographed the president I most photographed was George W. Bush because he was president for quite a few years during my. Was he in there for 2 terms? Right? Yeah. So that's 8 years of the 13 years I was in Joplin. What's interesting is I never photographed Clinton, and I was even at an Arkansas paper while Clinton was in office, and he never came anywhere near there. So I never got an opportunity to photograph Bill Clinton. So that was kind of odd. Yeah, and it's like I haven't photographed him, and of course I left professional newspapers before Trump came into office. I haven't had any opportunities to photograph Trump, and he was just in there for 4 years. And of course, I haven't ever photographed Joe Biden either. He didn't come with Obama on that trip when he was VP. Yeah.
And did you get to talk to him?
Talk to him? I got to talk to President Ford because he was there for a speaking engagement. It was after he was no longer in office because I photographed him probably while Clinton was in office. And yeah, and I mean, I got to talk to him a little bit. I shook his hand. So that's the only U.S. president I actually shook hands with. I was within like 5 feet of Barack Obama. I was like, right here while he was shaking hands with other people But you know, when you're with the media, when you're in a situation like that, you're there to cover the news. You're not there to shake hands with the president. The only reason I shook hands with President Ford was because he had a speaking engagement. He was done. It was just me and the reporter talking to him. That's not like out there, when you're trying to cover the news. So it was a very relaxed setting. So you had a moment to say hi and shake hands and talk. It was a completely different atmosphere. But yeah, when they're at especially with a president who's in office, they're there to work. They don't really have time to hobnob with the press, and that's really not the press's job to hobnob with it's kind of unethical to hobnob. But that was a former president, so it's a little different, it's not really, there's not a political agenda going on there anymore. So yeah, which coincidentally, President Ford was the only U.S. president who ever took office and was never voted in by the people. Because even if when you're a vice president, you were part of a party ticket and got voted in with the president. But because he was appointed by Nixon when was it Agnew was Nixon's vice president, yeah. And then he stepped down over the whole Watergate stuff, and then they appointed Ford. Yeah, so Ford was never elected by the people. He's the only U.S. president we ever had that did not get voted in.
One last question from online.
Oh yeah, sure. I forgot we had online
No,
folks
you're
too.
good.
Yeah.
Sony or Canon cameras?
I shoot Nikon.
Nice.
There's not anything wrong with any of them. I always tell people get one of those three. It's not that the other cameras aren't good, but it has to do with the glass and the lenses. Nikon and Canon are some of the best glass manufacturers out there. I'll put my Nikon glass up against anything. It is so sharp. And Canon glass is superior glass as well. The only thing better is German glass, but German glass is high dollar. I mean, you may think $10,000 is a lot of money, but if that were German glass, it'd be twice that much money, and not really do that much more. But long ago, it was always considered German glass was the best, and Japanese glass was number 2. And the margin's very, very close now. It's not as distant as it used to be. Glass used to be ground by hand, and the Germans had the best technique, especially, we're talking about the era like World War II and thereafter. That's why German glass was so good. But then the Japanese, when computer technology came out, now all that glass is ground by computer. So the margin of difference between the German glass and the Japanese glass is really diminished. So, but those are all Japanese companies, Nikon, Canon. Of course, a lot of these cameras are now manufactured in Thailand because the cost of creating this stuff in Japan has gone up so high based off the yen and their economy that they moved most of their facilities to Thailand. But Sony is a little more recent development for photographers. Mirrorless is the future. I don't have any mirrorless gear. These are all DSLRs, but I've been shooting since the original SLRs on film. And but I'm gonna go mirrorless. I'm really looking at the Nikon Z9 that just came out right before Christmas this late last year, and it's phenomenal. It's the best digital camera Nikon's ever made by far. It's got eye tracking. It'll track wildlife. It'll track automobiles. It's like, it blows your mind, amazing how good that camera is. And it's like almost 50 megapixels, so it's higher megapixels than anything I've got, and I've got some nice stuff. I think this one's like 22 megapixels. That's an older one, but it's a big pro body, but it's only like 12 megapixels, but it's built for speed. It's more of a photojournalism and sports camera. So it really depends on what you want and what you need. Everybody always asks that question, but like I said, the camera's the least important thing. Even if another system had a better camera, I would still stay with Nikon because of the glass. To me, the glass is more important than the camera body. You want a company that's got good glass, and you want a company that's got glass that's out there. Before Sony really hit the market with DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, you really wanted Nikon or Canon because let's say I'm out there working as a pro and something happens to one of my lenses. Well, I know 5 or 6 other photographers who shoot Nikon. I could borrow a lens in an emergency situation. Or same thing if you're a Canon shooter. You probably know 5 or 6 other photographers who are Canon shooters that you can borrow a lens from. And good photographers help one another when we know we've got a problem because we've all been there, we've all dealt with it. And it's good to be able to help one another. But if you're, let's say you're using a Fuji or you're using, some Yashica or some off-brand, they're not really off-brands, but they're like third or fourth tier cameras. If you're using something that's not in that top tier, like Nikon, Canon, and Sony, then whether someone even has a lens you can use, who knows, So I think as a professional, you got to use one of the big three because they're all super competitive with one another. There was a time Minolta was in that top tier, but they don't even really exist anymore. So I switched from Minolta to Nikon because Nikon was a higher tier camera. But yeah, I mean, and another thing I loved about Nikon was even when they went autofocus, you could still, they didn't change their lens mount. So that was one reason I went with them. I felt they were better to their customers. So I could take these DSLRs, this one's only 2 years old, and I can put lenses on there from the 1960s, and they work perfectly. They're manual, but they will work just fine on there, which is, to me, is really cool. So it opens up the number of lenses I can use on that camera to a huge variety. I can go pick up a lens in an emergency at a pawn shop for nothing that's an old manual focus lens and use it if I need to. So pretty cool. All right, any other questions, thoughts? I mean, as long as you go with one of the big ones, I don't think you'll really have an issue or a regret. They're all super competitive. Yeah.
I was gonna ask that, has somebody ever called you out to get a picture of them in public, and how would you do it?
What do you mean call me out?
Okay, I was gonna ask about that, like for like media release, how, the permissions and all that, do you have to do that? Like, well, from all the.
Not for news
as long as you're
media.
in public?
No, yeah, as long as you're in a public location. I mean, even if you're on a private location, you just need verbal consent. That's all you need in the US. Now that may vary in other countries. There might be different rules there, but if someone's in a public place, I don't even have to ask their permission to take their photo. If they're in a public park, I can take their photo. Now, that doesn't mean they can get upset about it and punch you or something, right? I'm just talking about legal versus people's feelings. Now, as a good photojournalist, you want to respect the people that you're working with and the people that you're photographing. So if someone comes up to you and asks you, identify yourself and let them know who you are, what you're doing, and that you're taking photos for the newspaper. Usually, like when I worked for the Kansas City Star, I had an ID tag that had my photo on it, said that I was in the editorial department, which is where the photographers are. And so I would wear that, and that way people would immediately know. When I worked for the Joplin Globe, if I was at parks, let's say taking photos of kids, which might seem suspicious if you didn't work for the newspaper, and it's not your own kids, that might be kind of creepy and weird and suspicious. But I'm pulling up in a Joplin Globe van, with the Joplin Globe on it and everything, so they know it's one of our circulation vans. So I tend to drive those around. You can't hardly miss that calling card, So that kind of helps people be like, oh, okay, yeah, he's in a Globe van. He must work for the Globe, They're not just going to loan those out to anybody. But yeah, you will get people that kind of question, like, who are you with? What are you doing? A lot of the time, people would get to know me, and that helps because then they're like, oh, yeah, it's T-Rob, Of course, sometimes they get to know you too well. Like when I worked at the Branson paper, I would go to the gyms to photograph, like let's say I'd go to the gym to photograph volleyball, and then the football guys would be in the crowd, and they would see me come in, and they'd start chanting, T-Rob, T-Rob, because I photographed their games too. And I don't know, sometimes you get popular, you don't intend to be. It's like, I don't know how this happened. I've never had that anywhere else. It's just kind of a Branson thing. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting stuff. But yeah, I mean, I've never really had anybody like get too upset about it. But I think part of it is you act professionally and you shoot professionally, and you're there documenting. I did kind of notice that I was on an assignment for the Houston Chronicle last fall, and I was in downtown Laredo taking photos, and I noticed some people coming up to me. I think they were more curious than anything. They're seeing me walking around with this big lens, but you don't usually see people, with stuff like I didn't have that huge lens there, but and somebody came up to me and they're like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm a professor over at KU, and I'm taking some pictures for the Houston Chronicle." And they were like, "Oh, okay." And after that, they were cool. But some people just need an explanation, they think something weird's going on. And some other guy, he goes, He goes, oh, I thought you were like with National Geographic or something. And I was like, no. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, why would National Geographic be? I don't understand why he would have jumped to that conclusion, but okay. But those things happen, you know. So some people just are curious and want to know. Other people think you're trying to invade someone's privacy and they think they're protecting people. But legally, if you're in a public place, you have no expectation of privacy. Unless you're in a bathroom, then you do have an expectation of privacy. That's different. We got a problem on campus right now. People taking pictures of bathrooms of other students' like feet. And that's unethical as well as illegal. It's actually called publication of private facts under the law. And you have an expectation of privacy, so it's an invasion of privacy. So I don't know why they're doing that. So we got a story we're working on for the student newspaper about that. Yeah, some things make you go, who thought that up and why did they think that was a good idea? I couldn't. So anyway, you got to be respectful of other people, you know. And so even as a journalist, you try to be respectful as much as you can. There's a few things I didn't include here because I knew you were high school students. I didn't want to get this stuff too graphic. I was in a police shootout back on Valentine's Day of 2001. And I was coming home from an assignment at Joplin High School, and I'm driving down the street, and I see this guy running down the street with a gun pointed back with an officer chasing after him. So I did what any sane person would do. I pull over my car and grab my camera that's right next to me and jump out while people are shooting guns and start taking pictures. So he ran down the block and around, and I came up, and there was a couple other people that had been in the vehicle. It was like a routine car stop, and they were handcuffed with another officer there, and I'm taking pictures of that. Pretty soon, that guy comes around the block. He like went around the block and came back. And I was there in the middle of this intersection on Main Street in downtown Joplin. So kind of a little bit like downtown Laredo, but you know, different look, right? A little different style, but still similar type of atmosphere. And so I'm there, and there's like tons of police have showed up by now because that other officer's calling it in, like, you know, shots fired, you know. All of a sudden, police are showing up everywhere, and I'm right in the middle of this thing, you know? And so I'm there, and I have police officers heading my way with that guy heading toward me with them in the background, shooting at him, and I'm behind him, you know, sort of. And so the only thing I could find was a piece of brick wall on the corner of one of the shops on the downtown, and I got a piece of just one brick wide. And I'm not a small guy, even though I was a little smaller then than I am now, but I'm not a small guy. I can't hide behind a 1 foot wide piece of brick. So I got this piece of brick there, and I'm standing behind it, shooting while the officers are shooting at him. And it's funny, we use shooting, and anyway. And so they're shooting his way, and there was like 37 shots fired or something. I forget what the news article was. Either 37 or 47 or something like that. And after it's all over with, I look, and the stop sign right behind me has holes in it. I mean, these bullets must have been less than a foot from me, just flying by me. It's a miracle I didn't get shot. For months after that, in the newsroom, they were all like, oh, we need to give you a bulletproof vest, you know? And it was like this running joke in the newsroom for months. But yeah, crazy stuff like that happens in this business. But yeah, then there's the ethics. So the photo I ended up running, which won like first in the state, it was part of a photo package that won second in state. I forget, and I think I won my newspaper chain. I won a national award for the best photo of the year for it. And I got the police all surrounding the guy with their guns out, and his head is barely up, and he's very bloody. So it's kind of a gruesome shot, which is why I didn't show it today, because high school kids, I didn't want to, you know, I showed it to my college students, like, you're adults, you know, there's a difference. But anyway, yeah, so it's kind of bloody, but we had to make an ethical decision of, they consider themselves a family newspaper, so the family newspaper doesn't really show a dead body there. Moments later, his head's all the way down, he's dead. So we used one where his head was still lifted up a little bit, but you're talking like seconds before the guy died. So it's very, very close. So that was an ethical concern. So for that one, I'm just not like picking the photo myself. I'm sitting there with the editor and the Metro editor, and they're all over my shoulder, and we're looking through frame by frame at what I got to pick the best shot. that not only was the shot that I was happy with, but the shot that was also the most ethical for that situation, that wasn't gonna violate the newspaper's policy of being a family newspaper. Now, that's gonna vary, like New York Times probably wouldn't have had a problem with it, the bigger the paper, or I know that a lot of times the Mexican papers, there's a whole different rule set in terms of dead body, no problem, and that really depends on the newspaper's goal, but we were in the Bible Belt in Missouri, and they considered that, too gruesome to run in the paper, so they wanted something that still showed the impact of what happened. You don't forget it, you don't push it aside because it's news, but sometimes you have to treat it with kid gloves. All right, I know I've ran over on my time.
Oh, you're good, you're
So
good.
anyway, I forgot about that, and I was like, but I didn't want to show that on the screen because I thought it might upset people to see, an almost dead body. So I decided to, I don't know.
Is there somewhere we can find it?
Yeah, it's on my portfolio. If you want to go to flickr.com, you can look me up on Flickr. So just look T. Rob Brown on it's FLICKR.com. And if you go to my portfolio, it's going to be the best way to find my top 20 images. Some of them are going to be the same ones you've seen up here, but I didn't include everything from my portfolio in this show. I also included some things in here that aren't in my portfolio, just to show examples of other situations. All right, yeah, feel free to check it out. There's lots of images on there. All right, I think that's it. I wanted to show the lenses and stuff, but boy, it always takes long. If anybody wants to look through the book, I've got the book here. Like I said, I've got about 40 images in here, so there's quite a few. This one's autographed, so just be careful with it because it's even got autographs from people that have passed away since then. So, like here's one of my Obama photos on the flat cover there. But yeah, like I said, I got about 40 images. I think it's 42 or 47 images. I don't know. Let me get myself out of your way because it looks like you got some awards to give out. That's cool.
Can we please acknowledge the coolest tie that I've seen?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, remember all the old school press cameras? Yeah, speed graphics. Yeah.
I'm living for it.
Somewhere I had a darkroom tie if I didn't lose it in the tornado. I've had it for years, and it has developing trays and safe lights and tongs and all kinds of cool stuff on it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brown, for your time and expertise and sharing your wisdom with all of us.
It's a busy career.
If you guys have any other further questions, you can always feel free to contact him. His contact information is up on the board. It just gave you his Flickr website. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to him. I'm pretty sure he's more than excited to
If you
share.
want to feel how heavy these cameras are, well, that one I don't think I have a battery in, so it's not as heavy as it normally is. But those is.
So right now it is time for lunch. So please, again, take some time to go get some food. Our next session will start at 1:30. So please, for those that are online, feel free to tune in at 1:30. We will be providing the links for that. But for now, have a good break, and we'll see you back this afternoon.
You can carry it up on your shoulder like that, because it's